Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Reality Check Podcast. I am joined tonight, clockwise, by I am still federally unemployed but happy Marcus. And below that, Raul Mas. Harrison is not with us tonight. He's out on assignment. I want to talk about the title, which is my novel, that's me, and publishing experience. My novel is called A Collection of Four Unusual Stories. And I will entertain questions from the panel if any are forthcoming. Basically, I published it, and we're going to talk about the publishing experience because that is equally, if not more important. Anyone who wants to publish something, that's unless you're going to self-publish, unless you're going to do it in your garage, you pretty much work through a publisher, and there are many of them. And there's competition. Obviously, they want your business. There's a couple that advertise a lot on Facebook, so we'll get into that shortly. The stories that I wrote about are unusual stories. They have some common threads. Some of them have life experience. Let me just name the stories. The first one, which is basically a novella, it's the longer of the four, and they get increasingly shorter. The last one is only 10 pages. That first one is called Deadly Descent, and it's about two lifelong friends. They're mountain bikers. They grew up in Tampa, and they are told about a bike trail, uncharted up there in Virginia. So they do bike vacations where you're traveling, riding the different trails in different parts. They find themselves in a rural town in Virginia, and then they looking for this trail. They can't find it. They finally do, and as soon as they get on that trail, they start encountering some very weird stuff, things that will challenge your beliefs in the physical universe, what you've come to know and think you know about it. They start finding out that there's also a murder took place up there and an unexplained death. So they start getting really drawn in. And these are two guys who, when they were children, did a really foolish thing. And that made them for life fearful about anything, made them back offish, made them unwilling to get involved. So this is an experience that just basically draws them in. And it's who they meet, how they deal with it. That's the story. And it's got a lot of terminology, but it's all defined. So if you're a reader that knows nothing about mountain biking, no worry. The people that have told me that they've read it and knew nothing about it were very pleased with the fact that everything is defined, all the terms, so you don't walk out of there in a brain fog. The next story is draws on my dental experience. That one is called David and Jean. David and Jean is a nightmare that I had one night years ago. Basically, it's a dentist who donates used equipment because he upgraded to newer equipment. That's common with us. We'll donate it to a clinic. He donates it to a community clinic. This is a small town in Ohio. There's a handyman named George who helps the dentist, whose name is Brent. He helps Brent install the equipment. And he says afterward, Brent takes him for breakfast. And he says, Doc, would you please come by my house and take a look at my boy? He's got the weirdest dental condition. And Brent basically is like, look, George, people tell me that all the time. Why don't you just come in Monday on the house? I won't charge you and bring him in and we'll take a look. And I'm sure we'll get to the bottom of it. But the man is adamant and he says it's so alarming what the boy has that the mother has refused to take him to a dentist because she's afraid that the kid will wind up an evening news story. So he goes to the house. He gets a small flashlight and he looks in the boy's mouth and what he finds is absolutely shocking. It is does not exist in any dental pathology books. There's no literature on it. It's completely flummoxing. He's never seen anything like it, and he starts investigating, obviously beyond the means of dental science because there's more to this, and that takes him on a path where he makes a determination. He promises to help this boy because this condition is causing the boy to barely be able to keep weight, and it is an existential threat. So that's what. And the moment he sets foot in that house, he begins to experience some really bizarre things. So
Dude,
that's
Carlos, I'm blown away. I mean, I thought this was a book about your life experience as a career in dentistry or something. And then
no,
I find out that are you like a horror writer here or what? I mean, it's like,
I'm
are
a
you like a Stephen King wannabe here? I mean, I'm just kind of like pleasantly
well.
surprised that there's a side to you that
Well, yeah,
you're
for
writing
that.
stories about mountain bikers descending into hell. I don't know.
Well,
Maybe it's like
yeah, this sounds I'm a mountain biker, by the way, and my wife and I have ridden all over the country. So yeah, the dentist one, I literally had a nightmare about that. But just at the beginning, I had a nightmare that ended when he looked in a boy's mouth and saw what he saw, and asked the boy what it was, and then the boy gave him his answer. I can't divulge anymore, but I assure you, it's a very enthralling story. The next story is about froggers. I don't know if you guys have heard of froggers. Froggers with PH, not with F. They are people that will sneak into your house, like an attic, a basement, and they will hide out in there undetected, unbeknownst to you. And they will sometimes just hang out to see how long they can last. Sometimes they'll do mischievous things to your house. Sometimes they'll mess with your head. And this is a young couple that hides in a basement of an elderly couple, their home in the attic. They not basement, attic. And the story is called Leap and Tree because that's the online names they use, i.e., Leapfrog, Tree Frog, get it? So
Mhm.
that's their online names on a dark web Frogger forum. So what happens one night, the lady, they go to bed, the woman is not sleeping very well. She wakes up and she hears a thud like a in this hallway, and that hallway has a, you guys are familiar that there's ladders, pull down attic hatches that have a ladder that unfolds. So when she hears that, she's thinking, oh my God, we never opened that access. What's going on? So she comes out with a flashlight. She doesn't want to wake her husband, and she sees a dark figure in the hallway. So she's beginning to like every sci-fi and paranormal movie she's ever seen starts flooding through her mind. She begins getting really scared. She shines a light, praying, please, whatever you are, apparition, go away, please. And when she shines the light on it, it is not an apparition. It's a young man in his 20s. And when he sees her, he runs up to the ladder and starts coming down with a woman that accompanies him, a young woman. At that moment, Marjorie is the woman, has starts feeling a deep pain in her chest and gripping herself, and she collapses from a heart attack. They zip out the door like gangbusters. She is left disabled because there's heart muscle damage. And after a long story short, the police are really unable to get much headway into anything. They go with the neighbors. There's no surveillance cam footage. They're basically unable to do anything else, particularly a small town in Indiana. So the husband, Press, Prescott, but his nickname is Press, decides that he's had enough and that it's very unfair that they've done this to his wife, upended his life, and Press begins to take matters into his own hands. So I think you know where that's going to go. But again, the things he does, the people that he reaches out to, is quite entertaining. The last story is called the Talmo Nine, and this is not a fictitious town. The others were all fictitious. This is a town in Georgia called Talmo, and that was inspired by, we visited Dahlonega, went to an art store that sold a bunch of tourist stuff, and I don't know if you guys ever heard of glass plate negatives.
No.
It's after the daguerreotype metal type tin types. These are literally a pane of glass upon which a negative is registered when you take the photo. And apparently, some artist found them in a trunk sale from an attic, and he published the photos. One of the photos was a vintage 1920s baseball team, and there was a really ragtag team. So this is about a minor league baseball team, fictitious team. You guys know about Leesburg, Florida, North Florida.
Mhm.
This
Yeah.
team is called the Leesburg Snappers, and they're on their way to Rome, Georgia to play the Emperors, which is a real minor league team. They got this crappy old bus, as is often the case with the minor league, low budget. The bus overheats, the water pump is shot, and they're forced to stop in the nearest town before the engine goes. So they pull into the town of Talmo. They find out that it can be repaired, but they've got to do it like a 2 hour drive to Atlanta to buy the part if they want to get it done that day and make it to the game that night and not forfeit by 7 to Rome. So the coach and the driver of the bus take off on a rent. They borrow a car. They basically rent it locally there, and they go to get the water pump. Meanwhile, the team's got to practice, and they're afraid that by the time they get to the game, they're not going to be able to practice and warm up. So they're walking around town after lunch, and they go to an old railway depot, which does exist, and there's an old baseball diamond behind her. It hasn't been used in ages. It's kind of withered away, but they start walking around and say, "My God, this is an old diamond. This is a baseball field. Nobody's used it in ages." And they decide, well, let's play here. They pull out some bases, those kind that they travel with. They plop them down. They start warming up with the trainer, and all of a sudden, this ragtag team walks up and they're like, "Oh God, these are like the local yahoos. We took their field. This is gonna be bad. They're gonna tell us, y'all get out of here." And basically, the guys are pretty friendly, and they say, "Well, how about we have us a game right here, right now, till y'all are going to leave? Let's have us a game. That way, you'll be practicing and warm up." So they decide to have the game. and it gets interesting after that. So those are the four stories.
Wow.
Are there any questions about any of those before I get into the publishing process?
No,
Well,
man, I'm just surprised, man. I was expecting something completely different. Is this like what talking about like possession here? I mean, what possessed you to write about what appear to be like, I guess, horror stories, or how would you describe the fiction? Is it horror? Is it
Some of that
mystery? I mean, what genre would you ascribe to the book?
mystery, action, adventure. The first story is action adventure for sure. Mystery, yeah, some supernatural, let's call it. There's some of that. Not sci-fi. There's no little green men. And by the way, for all you people that are listening to this, there is no politics whatsoever in the
Mhm.
stories. Marcus, you wanted to ask me something.
no, just that. I guess what inspired you to write a book? Because everyone innately has a story to tell,
Right.
and if you're in the military, you probably have two stories. So, and I guess kind of segueing to that, uh, I guess describe the difficulties on actually processing into thought into paper. Like how do you formulate? Like you want it to be short stories. You carry a little notepad, and yeah, just I'm just kind of curious.
Well, I can only speak for myself on what I did. Number one, I am a dentist with a vivid imagination. I did do a lot of writing, but it was like white papers, informative stuff. So, but I've always had that in me. I've always liked to read that kind of stuff. I like to watch those kind of movies. And one of the things I had to learn, thank God I spoke enough English where I didn't have to be translated or have help with that. But one of the most important words about writing is called syntax. How you structure your sentence, whatever. The company that you publish with has people that do that, proofreaders, and they're very helpful. And they will, I had a bad habit. Like I was saying, instead of like get off the sofa, I was saying like get off of the sofa. Get off of the hood of my car. And it's not, it's just get off my car.
Right.
Right. So that's an example of something they corrected. Now, putting the ideas down, I like to make a list. First of all, what's the story about? And by the way, they evolve as you start writing some of these stories. You may think you have the whole story figured out, but you may start writing and you wait a minute, I could go in this direction. I could get into that, or that particular character might have a little bit of a backstory. Let me talk about that. Things like that. And so that's how I put it on paper. Now, the first story, Deadly Descent, was written in about 2000, and it sat, back when you had a typewriter on an IBM typewriter, and it was a folder, and it sat there. It just said bike story, and it sat there for 20 years. And then finally, I said, I'm retired now. No more excuses. I want to publish a story, but I realized that story alone. Oh, and by then I had written David and Jean. That's the story of the dentist because a little boy's name is David,
Mhm.
and Jean. You have to find out who Jean is if you read the
Wow.
book.
How
Wow.
long? I mean, do you dedicate like 1 or 2 hours or half a day writing a story? And how long does it take
It's
for
usually no more than 2 to 3, but what happens is it's like anything else. It's in spurts. You might have something in you, and then and by the way, I encourage anyone who wants to write. Number one, don't worry about rejection. Just for God's sake, write. If you want to do it, do it. Doesn't By writing a story does not in any way uh, contractually force you or in any way make you spend the next step, which is spending money and going to a company. And the publishers will look at it, and if they don't think, because they make some money, but only after you pay them at first. So yes, they make money. But once the book starts to sell, they have to pay you off the debt that you made to them. This, at least the deal I made, they don't get a penny until I have been made whole. So in other words, it's in, it behooves them for the book to sell. So as far as writing, yeah, it could be long periods, or you might have like, oh, wait a minute, this just occurred to me, and you get over to your laptop. And this is why being retired really helped me, because if it would happen when I was in the office, I might think of something, maybe while seeing a patient or whatever. But clearly, it didn't allow me, So that's yeah, that makes a difference. Yes, Marcus.
so does a publisher or an editor kind of go with your story? Like, hey, like your syntax is off. Your this is not clear. There's no overarching arch to it, or just try to like a like a music producer. They got a band, they're synthesizing music, but it's the producer who kind of make it more magical in a way, just
Well, yeah,
to
they won't so much guide your story. These companies are quote unquote self-publishing. So you aren't really publishing, they're just providing their factory, their setup, their software. They assign you a publishing coordinator. And one of the bugaboos, and by the way, I worked, let's get the mystery out of the way. I worked with Page Publishing. They're based in Pennsylvania, I think, Page Publishing. And they were very good in many ways. One thing I found that I didn't like is that they have way too many clients and not nearly enough staff. So they're getting, they're getting paid, but I don't feel that they had enough people to help you. Case in point, I went through 4 different coordinators, which tells me they also have a turnover problem. And then you lose a little bit with each. And also the last coordinator I had, she was a very nice, dedicated lady. I'm grateful to her, but a lot of times she was pushing against the management, and they were sometimes slow and dragging their feet. The other, especially the promotion part. Uh, and I also, one of the issues I did not like is that they missed some typos. And, thank God I was able to catch the great majority of them. There was a couple that got away. They're not a big deal. But, they, if you're paying somebody and they're correcting your syntax, don't make the mistake of thinking they necessarily are going to correct your typos. So again, my advice to the potential writer, publisher, read everything they send you. Don't be lazy. Don't look at, okay, this looks pretty good, and don't read it when you're punchy late at night. Read it
Yeah,
when you're fresh,
yeah,
with some coffee next to you.
yeah.
And the painstaking it as it is, go over it, because there's a point where you read that draft and then you check off, you approve, proceed to the next step.
Yeah.
so
There's sorry, go ahead, Marcus.
no so like how do you find a publisher? Do you just Google it, or is there like a master list, or is there like a maybe like a yellow pages, one gets 4 stars, another one gets 3? How do you sort it out?
You should not find the yellow pages, but with me, it was again back to the evil social media. These people advertise a lot, and of course, they have success stories from people that did really well. Like anything else, just like the commercial where the lady did the face thing and she looked 50 years younger in 2 nights. So they I found them on Facebook, their ads, and it looked fairly reasonable. The packages weren't outrageous. They give you also 10 copies of the books, and then they had a bonus thing, so they gave me 50
Yeah,
because it's good to give the books out. And my book, by the way, and I'll do a close up of the cover when we finish the segment. My book is on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Apple Books, and it's also not an audio, but it's in digital or paperback, as you see behind me.
hmm,
That's paperback.
Now,
cool.
do the publishers, do they kind of promote your book? Like sometimes there's like writing competitions, or story competitions, like for mystery or horror,
Yes.
sci-fi, and they try to like push it out there just to hopefully get an award. Go ahead.
Well, what they do is they promote you. There's different, as I said in the beginning, and I want to go into it a little bit now. There's different packages that you get. I got like the medium of A, B, C, and D. I got package B, which gives you they promo it. It's really though you've got to put the work into it. They assign you a person for the publicity, a company called Snow Tree. They were very nice. At some point, they schedule an interview with you, and then that's a video interview like we're doing here, and they asked you some really good questions. And the lady was Stacy, very nice, very engaging. And then after that, there's also, after the whole thing is finished, they do a podcast. I was very disappointed in how many weeks it took to get the podcast, which is just audio. It wasn't a video podcast. That company took forever to get my podcast up, but it isn't just solely yours like the interview was. The podcast is they're going to interview 4 or 5 different authors, and then they'll go from book to book. And they go, Joe Blow wrote My Life as a Gypsy, whatever. And then they talk to Joe Blow. And then next, Carlos Sanchez, author of a collection of 4 unusual stories. And then they do the interview. So
Yeah,
yes, the answer to your question, Marcus, yes, they do promo you. Now you can there's even packages which I would have never done because they get quite expensive. They can even do it as a teleplay, as a script. And I will make no bones about it. My dream is that one day Deadly Descent becomes a movie because it would be a really good movie.
Mhm. Listen, it caught my attention just your description of it, man. Number one, I mean, I wasn't expecting it. Like I said, I mean, um, I never saw that side of you, Carlos. I thought I didn't realize you were a budding, Stephen King or a mystery author, or whatever. Right? It's just like I think that's really cool.
Well, thank you guys.
And look, I think it's valuable from the standpoint of people write books for different reasons. A friend of mine, his wife, who is a very gifted author. I mean, she's a PhD. She worked for many, many years in the international aid industry, right, with all these, NGOs. And she wrote this, searing um, book talking about, how incredibly flawed USAID was, et cetera, et cetera. And she's really, she self-published like you. I mean, she had this idea, and I think, I think she's working with Google or somebody. I mean, and she's putting it out there, and it's helped because, she's trying to create a new career for herself, and having a book helps you do that, right? I mean, it gives you, for whatever reason, if you have a book published, it's like
Street creds.
credibility, right? It's like, hey, listen, I wrote this book, and in her case, about the industry that I worked in, and and people just kind of think, well, gee, this guy wrote a book, he must be smart or something, right? I mean, I'm not being critical here. I'm just saying that, it helps to have a book, right? When you're trying to promote yourself, it gives you instant credibility, right?
Yeah, published author. It's published author, and there's a book club here where we live in our HOA. I'm going to be in the first week of December. I'm going to be showing it to the ladies in the book club. And by the way, I gave them a reader warning. For like the movie, you get those little initials L, V, violence, whatever. So mine would have L and V. There's some language, some colorful language. There's some violence. The story in Virginia and Georgia, a little vernacular because that's how they would speak to. You're not going to go to Talmo, Georgia. They're not going to speak like Downton Abbey, obviously.
Right, right.
So I
That's
use
cool.
some of that.
That's cool. I didn't know that side about you, Carlos. That's really neat, man. That's
Well, think a lot of people that have known me for my entire life were surprised when
yeah,
they read it. And the feedback I've gotten is that it's a page turner, and once you start reading it, it really grips you.
that's cool.
So that's good. Let
Really
me just
cool.
show the cover real quick, and I'll put a link to the interview that they did with Snow Tree when I publish this on
Let's see the cover. A collection of unusual stories, Carlos Sanchez.
four.
And what is
Well,
the image in the front? What is it, Carlos? What's actually on the image? What's the image show? There's like a moon and a lady and on a hilltop, or no, a wolf. A wolf. Okay, okay.
it's two coyotes, and there's a reason for the coyotes. And when you read Deadly Descent, you'll know.
Okay. All right.
You'll know
Cool.
why the coyotes. 'Cause
So if,
they,
if somebody
you know,
wants if somebody wants to purchase the book, just say they happen upon this channel. You're talking about your book. Is there a place for a person to purchase your book?
well, I'll put a link to Amazon where they can purchase it there, and I'll put also, a link to the interview. But
All
yeah,
right.
I'll put a link so if people want to purchase it, by all means, it's much appreciated. And as I said, it's those that have read it, I've gotten really good feedback. So thank you guys for indulging me, and thank you to my audience.
One more indulgent. You mentioned about there's pitfalls to publishing,
Mhm.
but I don't think you talked about that.
Yeah, the picture is number one, the turnover and coordinators is disconcerting because then you get a new coordinator that hasn't been with you for a few weeks. Okay,
Okay.
so there's that. Also, because they're understaffed, it takes longer for everything. So, we're going to do this each step of the process where you get the draft, you send them the PDF, they look at it, etc. And then they send it back and then they underline and they show you all these little notes and things. It's quite intricate, but they miss some spellings, they missed a couple of punctuations. and so you still have to DIY it, regardless. And again, because there are too few people doing those jobs for too many clients, that process takes longer to come. So your book is held up while you're waiting, and it took just much longer than it should. And that's a cautionary tale. And as I said before, I can only speak for the company with which I dealt. I would urge anyone to try to look into that and ask those questions, learn from my experience. And I've learned after that too, that there are other companies, there's a lot of competition. And if you're going to sell a book, know that there is ferocious competition. You hear about the attention span that today nobody reads, that Gen Z doesn't read. My book is obviously not an intellectual book. It's not for PhDs, but it's an entertaining book, and people do want to be entertained. And there are so many books that are New York Times list bestsellers, so somebody's reading something.
Okay, cool.
All right, so let's go on to Venezuela for those of you who don't habla. So it's everyone is aware of Maduro and what's going on, and the speedboats, and how about each of you guys start with your take, Marcus, or would Raul want to go first and give your take on Venezuela?
Go ahead, Raul.
And where do I begin? There's so much to unpack here.
Yes.
I think you got to ask yourself, kind of start at the beginning. Why is this happening, right? Why has Trump taken such a strong interest in Venezuela? Why do we have, the Gerald R. Ford, a super carrier, the latest carrier that we have in our fleet down there, along with about 18 or 20 other warships that we're aware of? And I think the answer to that is that, Trump, as part of his campaign, has always been very interested in the subject of the drugs that are coming into the United States. He has personally met with a lot of family members who have lost their children to fentanyl or cocaine or whatever. I think it's a subject that really resonates with him. If you look at Trump's sort of background, I mean, one thing that I think people forget about Trump is, he doesn't drink. You see him at these state dinners and stuff, and he's got, not champagne, but whatever, like fizzy water, whatever, carbonated water type of stuff, right? I think his father. I think there's some family issues there with alcoholism or something, and the guy just like completely avoids any sort of alcoholic beverage. And I think so there's a predisposition there to be adverse to anything that could be addictive. And then on top of that, he's heard these stories his entire life, people that have lost family members to and in fact, I think some of the members, if I'm not mistaken, I'm trying to remember who it was, but one of the senior guys there, I don't know if it's Witkoff or Lutnick or one of those senior guys there had a family member that I think suffered greatly or lost a family member to I think drugs. I could be exaggerating here, but my point is that there's a lot there that is at a very personal, visceral level that I think Trump takes very seriously. And I think that he now also has Marco Rubio on board, obviously from Cuban American exile, pushing the fact, and I think rightly so, that for too long we have ignored Latin America, that it is filled with these sort of tin horn dictators and corrupt governments, and they look the other way because the narco trafficking business has gotten so humongous that it is an enormous generator of money for so many of these states. And in that, I can assure you 110% he's right. Okay. I've traveled to Mexico over a period of 5 years, practically every month. This was 20 years ago. It was a much different country, right?
Yeah.
But even back then, okay, there were already places in Mexico that you just did not want to go because they were so dangerous. They were so controlled by the narco traffickers. And the amount of money that is involved in the drug trade, we're talking about literally billions and billions of dollars, right? And here you have in the case of Venezuela, they've completely, ruined their oil industry. Through mismanagement by nationalizing it. I mean, they robbed it blind. Okay, it's like they picked all the meat off the carcass. There's nothing left. They didn't invest in the oil platforms and stuff. And so now, the revenue coming in from the drugs is as much, if not more, than what's coming in from their oil production, right? I mean, Venezuela still has the largest oil reserves in the world. I think something like 330 billion, barrels of oil or something, right? Some outrageous number, right? They are
it has more oil than Saudi Arabia, but
exactly.
it's dirty oil.
Yeah,
it's like full of sulfur. They have to use the refineries,
right.
either here or in the U.S. to purify it.
And so it's a huge cash producer, and it in a place like Venezuela, Mexico. I mean, it's an enormous component of the economy, right? You have smaller countries in Central America, like Honduras, okay, that is basically a narco state. I mean, everything that takes place in that country, all the judges are on the, I mean, there's enormous corruption in the country. Drugs are a way of it's part of the business of the country. I hate to say it, but it's true. And I think Marco Rubio has sort of elevated that and said, listen, the reason we have all of these drugs flowing in here to the U.S. is because these countries south of the border are out of control, right? And I think that Trump hears that, and given his natural inclination to be, adverse to drugs, and part of his whole campaign and listening to these stories, I think it's a very serious effort to tell the narco traffickers this is not going to happen anymore. And I'm reminded of that movie, which I'm sure you guys saw, with Harrison Ford. What was the name of it? Clear and Present Danger, right?
Yeah.
And it's basically kind of like what's going on with Trump right now, except, obviously Hollywood movie, fictionalized, but it's a president that, gets ticked off at the drug dealers and stuff. And so he sends a special operations team down to Mexico or something to, go after the drug dealers and start a war against them. And it's, typical Harrison Ford, super CIA agent and good guy and all that stuff, and a lot of intrigue. That's a very well done movie. What we're seeing right now is a clear and present danger, to the nth degree, playing out in real life. And so I don't think Trump is, necessarily trying to, recreate that movie, but and maybe this is something you want to talk about, Marcus. I mean, there's an order out there that has basically designated the cartels as foreign terrorist organizations. There's a legal justification that this administration has come up with. Nobody knows, because they haven't seen that drafting of that finding, if you will, that presidential finding that has given them the green light to go after these terrorist groups. But I think that's a big part of this, and maybe Marcus, you may want to touch upon that. I mean,
so I'm just going to do a little pushback, just for my research. The pushback is where Maduro, the head of state, is being tied to narco trafficking through the cartel of Sons, where there's like Colombia, a few experts of Venezuela, they said there's no connection. There's no proof. Okay, just that just one. Another thing is if it's a case of tying a head of state for narco trafficking, we could easily look at China, who provided fentanyl precursors to the cartels in Mexico. And then we could also look at the president of Mexico, who, whether it's an ineptitude or not, or being kind of bought in, allow these cartels to push drugs into the U.S. And another slight pushback is there's been at least 21 uh, missile strikes on Venezuelan vessels, totaling like maybe 86 deaths or whatnot. My take is if this is about counter drugs, like normally when you use like the Coast Guard, it's usually visit board and seizure. You want to seize, you want the proof, you want evidentiary proof to do a conviction. So to do missile strikes without 100% verification it seems highly unusual. Okay, so I mean that's just kind of alarm bells ringing in my head. But the thing is, with Venezuela and the U.S., I look at it more like a big pendulum swing on events. As you mentioned before, 90% of exported oil is how Venezuela derived their revenue for a while, which is like 40% of their GDP. And they had an extreme this sucks moment, and back in '86, where the barrel of oil was like $40, and it dropped down to 10 or 12. So pretty much 3/4 of the value of their revenue disappeared. And this kind of coincide when Saudi Arabia opened up the spigots to destabilize the Soviet Union. We talked about that in like the first one or two podcasts.
Right.
To because it was a Cold War race, and this is some economists would determine like this is a good way to destabilize the Soviet Union. Not right away, but it accelerated it. Right. So what happened after that? Like I said, it's a cause and effect, because as you mentioned, Venezuela was rife with corruption, which is not atypical of Latin America. Like those regions have like the worst levels of corruption in terms of governance, and that's not how you really work a society. But when the oil crashed in '86, what it did was it forced Venezuela into austerity measures with the World Bank and whatnot. So they have to do a lot of cost cutting. They have to fire a lot of people. They have to do savings. But what it did was it impacted the poor a lot more, which cause and effect. It gave rise to Hugo Chavez. He promoted a socialist platform, and he got elected out of that. So, and then going back down to.
By the way, that's important because a lot of people don't realize that the reason that they were in this mess with Venezuela is not because there was a like in Cuba revolution where a guy took over the country type of stuff. Venezuelans voted for Hugo Chavez in an election, right? He was democratically elected the leader of Venezuela. Okay, and Marcus, you're absolutely right. The frustration of the people, and it wasn't. I mean, I think a lot of them are sort of the lower middle class people that were frustrated, but I think a lot of even upper class, professional Venezuelans were angry at the obvious corruption that had been going on for so long. I mean, everybody that was a president of Venezuela, just like everybody that's been a president of Mexico, retires, with, humongous fortunes. And I think, people were angry at that. And even though, and listen, I live in South Florida. I know a lot of Venezuelans. We all told, every Cuban American down here told their Venezuelan friends, don't vote for this guy. You guys don't know what you're getting into with socialism and communism. And they all said, oh, no, that will never happen here in Venezuela. We're too much of a developed country. This is not going to turn into Cuba. And guess what? Venezuela has in fact turned into a much larger version of Cuba, because they adopted, number one, the corruption continued. It's just under a different, banner, if you will. But, Hugo Chavez and now Maduro and all of his cohorts have, enriched themselves enormously as a result of this drug trade and controlling a country. And the tragedy of Venezuela is that, Venezuela is blessed not just with oil, man. I mean, these guys have arable lands, they've got minerals out the wazoo, copper, bauxite, you name it. They have fisheries, they're on the Caribbean, they got a huge coastline, right? They have been blessed inordinately with natural resources. And instead of being a powerhouse on the global stage, they have descended into this tyranny, into this dictatorship. And you have to ask yourself why, right? And there's been a lot of people that have studied this issue. I'm certainly not an expert in it. The people will tell you, well, this goes back to, the Spaniards coming over and colonizing, and the whole, the fiefdoms that were developed, and the machismo and the, autocracies and all that stuff began with the colonization of Latin America. And this is just a continuation of it with different actors, okay, to suppress the poor. And there's absolutely some truth to that, right? I mean, there has been, a lack of fairness in the distribution of wealth in a lot of Latin American countries. You've always had the very privileged people at the top of the pyramid, and then you've got a base of people that are just, in extreme poverty. You also have a situation where countries like Venezuela, and this, I'm sorry I'm taking up so much time, but I think it's an important point to make. If you look at, and I learned this literally back in the 1980s when I had to do a case study at business school, analyzing the economic development of Singapore with the economic development of Venezuela. And mind you, this is back in the 80s, right? And we were taking a look at how was it possible that Singapore, this tiny little island with no natural resources out in the Pacific, was able to become one of the most powerful, the great tigers of the Pacific, this incredibly self-sustaining, educated, developing computer chips, all sorts of high technology country. Whereas Venezuela, with all this oil wealth, was still kind of languishing, didn't really have the same levels of education, of sophistication, of culture, if you will. And one of the things that, when you actually studied the two countries, if you looked at, and this is, I'm talking back in the 1980s here, guys. I don't have the latest figures, but back then, the percentage of GDP that Venezuela dedicated to educating its population as a percentage was comparable to countries in sub-Saharan Africa, okay? Even though Venezuela had this enormous wealth of money, they weren't plowing it into their most valuable resource, which is their people. They weren't elevating the capacity of their own people to create, wealth and businesses. And I've seen that over and over again,
And Singapore has the rule of law as well.
Yes. I mean, but the difference there was, and one of the things that Lee, the prime minister who ran the country for many, many years, did, is he told all of his government officials, he said, listen, you come to work for the government, I'm going to pay you as well, if not better, than what people are making in the private sector. So you, Mr. Health Minister, you're going to make $500,000 a year, $1 million a year for running the Ministry of Health. Okay. But here's the big but. If I catch you stealing 1 penny, okay, if I see that you are corrupt, all right, you will be caned, okay, you will be thrown out of your job, you'll be thrown in jail for the rest of your life, right? So he understood that, corruption was almost like a natural type of thing that happened when people got into positions of power where they had the levers of authority, and government to make people either really rich or really poor. And he wanted to make sure that everybody was focused on the same end goal, which was to create a valuable nation state. And he did that very successfully.
I wanted to chime in on some of the stuff that each of you have been saying. Uh, as far as the wealth that they have with the petrodollars, my mom in the 80s, Raul, was an escrow closer for Lawyers Title Company in Doral, what is now Doral.
Yeah.
The Venezuelans would come in with briefcases stuffed
Yeah.
with cash as
Yeah.
a down payment, and very arrogantly plop it down, and here you count it. And my
Yeah.
mom had to get some poor soul to count it. The other thing with the boats, what Marcus was talking about, that we don't have the proof. I mean, it's nice to show the evidence, the seizure, but at the same time, I think part of what there's another issue of why Trump has got it out for Maduro, who is illegitimate, by the way. Chavez, yes, was elected democratically. Maduro was not. He stole that election big
Right.
time. But
Yeah.
anyway, getting back to the boats, I don't think Trump is interested in the evidence, and it could be a mistake long term. He just wants to crack down on them. It's also interesting that why did we not do that? And yes, Marcus, you're correct that we could look at China in a more lethal capacity with the precursor chemicals. However, China isn't sending boats across. China isn't that close, and China is too big an economic factor for us to do to them what we can do to a third world country in Latin America.
Yeah.
And by the way, the family thing with Trump and alcohol is his brother Fred, who
Yeah.
died at age 42 of
Yeah.
alcohol
Right.
related.
Right. His brother,
He had
exactly. Brother Fred. You're absolutely right. Yeah. That's it.
yeah, he was a pilot, and it just destroyed his life completely.
Yeah.
It's interesting with these boats. Everybody's focused mostly on the boats coming across the Caribbean, but once in a while, have you guys noticed that there's boats coming from the Pacific? Where are those coming from?
No. The boats on the Pacific are coming up from Ecuador and Colombia along the coast of the Pacific coast of the continent, right? So these are basically the same types of boats. They're go fast boats.
Mhm.
Those are not, if you look at the construction of those boats, the not just the semi-submersibles, which obviously are carrying drugs, or sort of skimming underneath the surface of the water, but those boats are not fishing boats. I mean, they've
I
got
know.
3 or 4, huge outboard engines in the back. They've got 55-gallon drums of fuel on the boat, because those outboard engines burn through a lot of fuel. And then the bales that you're seeing are obviously the drugs, right? The cocaine. So now the sad part about this is the people that are probably driving those boats are itinerant fishermen. And this has been going on in Latin America forever. I remember when I first went down, back in the 80s to work in Panama. There was a lot of, back then it was marijuana, right? And you'd hear the fishermen always refer to, all these camarones, all these shrimp, right? And I thought, man, I didn't realize the shrimp business was that, big a business, right? Until somebody explained to me that no, when they're talking about, the huge shrimp that they're moving, they're talking about marijuana. They're talking about drugs. It was just like another nickname, because these were fishermen, and they just didn't, they had to find some way to describe what they were doing in a subtle manner, if you will. So they just referred to it as, hey, listen, we had a huge catch of, shrimp, and we made a lot of money from it,
What is the
and
Pacific
the private
role?
pilots were involved in it, moving drugs around. It was much more, smaller scale, but already, the people, if you think about it, fishermen is basically living hand to mouth, right? And somebody comes along to them and says, listen, I'll give you $500 if you drive the boat up, this boat that I'm going to give you up the coast, and deliver it to such and such a guy. I'm going to give you whatever, $5,000, right? I mean, it's a huge sum of money that basically allows them to live for the rest of the year. Okay. And so these guys, they have an easy, enormous amount of people willing to do this.
So where do you think that the Pacific, that you say the Pacific coast of which country? From where are they? Are they
From
departing?
Ecuador to Colombia, and they basically sail up the coast, typically to Mexico. Okay, they get it into Mexico, and then in Mexico it comes overland. And I could tell you, from having visited down in Key West many years ago, the it's not as prevalent now, but the amount of planes that were leaving Venezuela going to particularly the island of Hispaniola, Dominican Republic, and Haiti.
Yep.
The number of planes that were flying out of Venezuela, huge numbers, carrying cocaine to the Dominican Republic or Haiti, and then what they would do is they would cross it over. The stuff that was coming to the U.S. would cross over into Puerto Rico. Once it's in Puerto Rico, it's now in American territory, and it's no longer. It's very easy then to put it on an American Airlines flight, and it comes to America. The cocaine in somebody's suitcase, and they smuggle it in that way or through some other channel because it's now in the U.S. It's no longer being inspected by customs at a border or whatever. And from there, also a lot of this drug money that you're seeing that's being blown up is also destined from Europe, and it tends to go up there, probably to the same places, Haiti, Dominican Republic, and then there it gets put on ships that go to Europe and take that stuff for semi-submersible. They picked up off the coast of Spain the other day, semi-submersible, probably from a mothership of some sort, that was bringing cocaine into I think Spain or Portugal or something. I saw it reported on the news. But one of the things that all this highlights in my mind is, and people forget about this, and I think the reason I don't want to say I'm okay with it. I understand what Marcus is saying. Listen, I think everybody would like to understand the legal justification, and I think it's there. I don't think the president is half cocked and would just go off there and start blowing up ships without some sort of legal justification. He has the entire Department of Justice. He has White House counsels. I mean, I'm sure these guys crafted a legal argument for why they can in fact do this, and I'm supportive of it from the standpoint of and I understand what Marcus is alluding to. I've seen those operations, where the coast
just make it bulletproof.
Yeah, where the Coast Guard is actually they'll put a Coast Guard crew, a handful of coasties on a U.S. Navy destroyer, because the Coast Guard has a unique function in that they can operate as both a military unit and they also have civilian law enforcement authority, right?
It's like Title 32 or Title 10.
Right, Title 32, Title 10, whatever it is, right? But they basically have the ability to act as a law enforcement. So the Navy ship, which is a military ship, now has a civilian law enforcement group attached to it, and they can interdict legally under U.S. law these boats, and they can seize the drugs. And that's how they were doing it before. But it is a very time-consuming process, right? Because you have to. These boats are very, very fast. Okay, and the Coast Guard developed techniques for them. They would put a guy on these helicopters, okay, with a 50 caliber sniper rifle and a red dot sight, and they would basically shoot the outboard engines, which would make the boat stop, and then the Coast Guard could catch up to them. But it was a very time-consuming effort. It was very difficult to do. It wasn't easy. It's a hell of a lot easier to just, fire a Hellfire missile, and that shit locks onto the heat signature, and that boat is.
Yeah, but my take is the next stage. You have the Gerald Ford. You have at least 4 destroyers. It's probably a marine amphibious unit there. But the thing is, it's like it's gearing up for something. But but you need, like I say, more evidentiary proof to validate their actions, and I think that becomes like a case of like unintended consequences. Using I'm going to backtrack a little, but for like statecraft, using like sanctions as a tool of diplomacy. And I know the reason why, they want to affect the currency, because if you're putting sanctions, they don't have the hard currency to function as a country because it's oil dependent. They have to rely on the refineries in the U.S. and the refineries in Venezuela. But if you have sanctions, they're not getting the parts to repair their refineries. Mm-hmm. And then you get who's going to buy the oil. So in some ways, my take is the unintended consequences is because of the sanctions, you get a lot of an exodus, like at least 600,000 Venezuelans coming to the U.S. And then Trump said, "Hey, we're canceling TPS out of it." So that's one of the unintended consequences. We think we're going to undermine, but it just came back at us through all these illegals. And number two, it pushed countries that are not aligned with us more towards them. So you get China, you get Cuba, you get Russia and Iran. So you get with China, they're buying their oil. With Cuba, they're providing the intel information. With Russia and Iran, they're buying military hardware for them. So I'm just saying, everything has a push pull. Everything has an unintended consequences to it.
Everything you do has consequences, Marcus. But I think one thing that is becoming, apparent to the world, is that the old rules-based world of diplomacy and government to government, relationships and statecraft and diplomacy, you are now dealing with transnational criminal syndicates that have billions of dollars. In the case of the cartels in Mexico, their army is probably as powerful as the Mexican military. In fact, right now, the people that are confronting the cartels in Mexico are the Mexican military, primarily their naval infantry, their Marines, because the damn country's so corrupt that the law enforcement tips off the drug dealers, so they've got the military now involved in doing that. And what you're finding is that if you really truly want to break the backs of these extremely powerful groups, that they don't give a shit about the law. They don't give a shit about the restrictions that you're putting on them, right?
Or due process,
or the due process. They're in it for the money. They're in it for the power. They're in it to make a living. And I think Trump, I'm happy, quite frankly. I'm pleased to see that reality has now sunk in, and people have realized we cannot confront these enormous transnational organizations trafficking billions of dollars, killing all these Americans using quote unquote traditional means, right? And I think U.S. intel is very, very good. I think these boats are very clearly, bringing in drugs. And I'm sort of pleased that the gloves have come off, and you're now seeing and by the way, the intel that's being collected right now, the signals intelligence, is unbelievable, because all of these drug dealers are scrambling to figure out what the hell to do. They're calling all their contacts. All that communications is being picked up. These ships that are out there, we have littoral combat ships. We've got destroyers. We have an amphibious landing group with 5,000 Marines. We have the aircraft carrier. The amount of firepower there is unbelievable. And these plans were put in place probably since the beginning of the Trump administration, and they're now coming to fruition. The president has a lot of options at his disposal. Let's see what he does.
Yes, Marcus.
My take is they have a good presence, but not enough for an invasion.
No.
And my take is if you're going to have that show of force, you're sending a message to other cartels or to other countries, for one, and number two, you're doing it for a purpose. And my take is, there's four options. Either you're forcing Maduro to abdicate, you're compelling people in his inner circle to do a coup d'etat because he has a $50 million bounty on him, or do a decapitation strike if they have good intel. And number four, maybe inspire a color revolution. Where those are because when you see the barbarians at the gates right near your walls, you're gonna instill fear, especially in Maduro's military staff. All right, well, Maduro's a liability. we're gonna, you're gonna have like a few people want to conspire, like, let's take them out and get the bounty, and
Yeah.
the U.S. would be off our back. That's
I think you're absolutely on that. I think you're absolutely right, Marcus.
I want to segue now to another factor that again, this is speculative. Anyone who knows who Benny Johnson is,
No.
podcaster,
No.
he had an interesting piece about the other motivation for this is that it is just sheer, with a good outcome in the end anyway, but sheer revenge for Trump to Maduro because of Venezuela's involvement with the voting machines and their role in stealing the 2020 election, which I have no doubt. From what I've read, I mean, it took place. Those millions of votes suddenly appearing. I don't know if that's still happening, like in Virginia. Apart from the fact that in Virginia,
well,
the
there's
Republicans.
speculation of Brazil with Bolsonaro being undermined with the voting machines.
Yes,
So and Dominion has been tied to at least 70 countries. So
so there's something there, and I think Trump would love to whack Maduro, would love to do a decap strike, but
I think there's a, that's an added bonus to them, right? I mean, I think there's a lot of different motivations here. I think it's the drugs. I think it's, the fact that, we've had millions of Venezuelans have to come to America because, the country's in ruins. I mean, there's an argument to be made is, we can rebuild Venezuela. We can rebuild it better, faster. We can.
Trinidad, Aragua.
Yeah, we can. It's got great real estate. Trump is, and all that's absolutely true, man. I mean, there's no reason why Venezuela can't be this incredibly vibrant, healthy democracy. Okay. But, American efforts to get involved in nation building have failed spectacularly. Okay.
Yep.
So I agree with Marcus. I don't think you're going to be seeing an army going in there. We're not going to occupy Venezuelan territory. But I think you are going to see, and by the way, I think, and Marcus will agree with this, you don't send out many ships into the Caribbean for that. You can't keep them on station indefinitely. The longer they are there sailing around,
you're creating gaps.
Equipment starts to break down, morale starts to diminish. You either lose it or you use it or you lose it, right? So something's going to have to happen. And I think what Marcus is alluding to, you're going to see, Tomahawk, cruise missile strikes on certain facilities that ports or transshipment points. You're going to see, police headquarters that are, involved in the corruption being blown up. You're probably going to see the what little's left of the Venezuelan Air Force destroyed very, very quickly. But I think there is going to be some sort of kinetic activity. It will be very precise. It'll be very targeted. But the Venezuelan people will see right away that they are completely vulnerable, that the U.S. can do whatever the hell they want, and there is nothing Venezuela can do about it. And it's going to be, okay, how much more do you want of this? Okay, either get rid of the guy or the pain will continue, right?
I think President Trump is prescribing to President Reagan's view on military action. Make it short and sweet, get it over with. So he did it with Grenada, and Trump did that with ISIS within 90 days when they almost took over Iraq in their Honda Toyota pickup trucks. Did it with the Iranian nuclear power plant. So everything's like very, very precise, but very limited engagement. So I believe Venezuela would be the case as well. Like you said, there's not enough to invade a country, but to have a show presence or to make a statement or to get these at least four objectives, one of these four options done.
Now look, one thing, Marcus, that I think as I'm hearing you talk, it reminds you of the fact that I think everybody looks right now in the world. When you look at military action, a lot of people aren't looking at the U.S. anymore. They're looking now at what's going on in Ukraine with the technology and the drones and all this stuff and the shift in warfare. But they're also taking a look at the incredible success of the Israeli Defense Forces operating in country in Iran. One of the things we learned in this recent war was that And the Israelis have been working on this for decades. They have a network of agents operating in Iran. Iran used to have a very large Jewish population. A lot of those people fled to Israel, and I suspect that a lot of them are now back in Iran. They've been infiltrated there over years, and they have actually have, look at, in the first few days of that conflict with Iran, how they took out all of the Iranian nuclear scientists. They were blown up in their cars or in their homes, missile strikes, whatever, from teams locally. And the president has acknowledged that he's authorized covert action within Venezuela. He's made no bones about it, which I was kind of shocked to see that admission. But if you start, you can very surgically begin to put enormous pressure. Hopefully, the U.S. has the intelligence of who exactly is involved in the drug trade, and you start seeing those people getting, for lack of a better word, the way it's described, and by the mob, they're getting whacked, right? The chief of staff is getting whacked. Maduro's, the people around Maduro are getting whacked, and somebody's going to wake up and say, "Holy shit! I don't want to be the next one. Let me take out Maduro himself."
Marcus.
Just to piggyback off of you, the end goal is regime change,
Yeah.
and I listed like 4 options, which is abdication, decapitation strike, coup d'état, or color revolution. And you brought up a good point about like surgical strikes, to amplify these 4 options, especially like whether it's a revolution or coup d'état. To amplify it, you have the surgical strikes would be like key sectors in their ability to speak, communicate, and enforce. So heading like electrical grid, communication towers, police or emergency services, some aspects of the military, where there's been at least one coup d'état attempted overthrow, and a bunch of revolts, mass protests, but they got squashed by the military. So if they use surgical strikes to offset that, it's like what happened in Libya. Gaddafi was good dealing with the insurgents and with protesting, but when they got the UN involved, with their air sort, they kind of crumbled. So I look at it as a limited engagement of kinetic activity, but no invasion, but just to do certain limited functions, and I'm sure they already identified leadership in opposition to afford a transition.
Yeah, and also on a walk and chew gum note, as we end off here pretty soon, I believe that this is all great, but Trump, the DOJ, the economy here had damn well better be worked on in the meantime. People are tired of hearing I've solved 8 wars. Nobody gives a flying fuck about 8 wars in countries they don't even know how to pronounce. They don't care. As callous as it is, the Joe Sixpack with a remote in his hand and a burger in the other, and the game is on, is looking for what have you done for me, and why am I paying so much money for French fries? That's what they're looking at. And if Trump can do all that, and I hope he does, as a person, as a individual whose family left Cuba under the Castro tyranny, I very much want that to happen. However, he's got to also work on the economy here, because if not, he may not have too much time and power anymore. Because if they take the House and Senate, even just the House in 26, Trump is up shit creek.
Well, it takes 18 months to 24 months to change the economy, turn the economy around. If it was a Paul Volcker under Reagan, after Carter,
Yes.
he had to inflate the interest rates just to promote savings and strengthen the dollar. So
Yeah, and he's got a treasury secretary that is not treasurer, a Fed chair who has no interest in helping him. On the contrary, is more than happy to undermine him. And he's also got a very stupid population. that does not understand that it takes more than 10 months to fix 40 years of utter failure. And now they created a mess, and now they're running a lot of messaging to blame the Republicans for it. They've got to do a much better job. Look at this thing with the indictment, the Comey indictment. Who the fuck was in charge there to put that Halligan, Lindsay Halligan? She's hot. She looks like a superman.
Actually, I don't think. I think this is just a media contriving over nothing, because there's been plenty of AGs who were on a 120-day interim were doing cases. So there's been precedent cases on that. I think
Well,
it's much about do over nothing.
well,
You got a liberal judge making that
I know
call.
that, but that if that is the case, and I pray that it is, that liberal judge needs to be defeated at need to be struck down by a higher court.
But yeah, and Carlos, I think part of the problem there is that, and this has been, I don't think has gotten a lot of visibility. The fact that the president has been trying to get his AGs approved in all these states, okay, but in the Senate, which has to approve these positions, they defer to a senator can basically stop the nomination of somebody, and that's what's happened here. I mean, they've dragged their feet, using this antiquated rule that they have that it's like a blue slip, or so that any senator can basically say, no, I don't want that person being the attorney general in my state, and they've been using that very effectively to not approve the president's, the people that the president has picked to put in there. And so, it's just another way that the Democrats have found to gum up the works for President Trump. I don't know, man. This is it's the Dems. They're not completely put out of power yet. I mean, they're using every little instrument that they can within the halls of Congress to continue to make things difficult for the president. The only legislation that can be passed right now is these massive bills, like this one big beautiful bill that is exempt from the filibuster type of situations, right? Because it's all related to appropriations and spending and things of this sort that are essential to pass. But passing any sort of individual legislation in the House of Representatives related to, you name the policy, simply doesn't work, because the Democrats will find a way to basically just kill it before it even gets to the floor, unless it is part of some huge, bigger, budget reconciliation bill. That's the word I was looking for. It has to be part of and so the only legislation that's going to pass, if the Republicans keep control of the House and the Senate, is going to be another budget reconciliation act, because the way our government was set up, individual representatives and surely individual senators, especially with the whole filibuster thing, can still gum up the works for a long period of time. And the Democrats realize that that's the only card that they have to play with. And so that's what they're doing. They're hoping to flip the House. And I think you guys are both absolutely right to mention that the president cannot take his eye off the ball. I think this whole Epstein thing has been, in many ways, and the president even knew it, there's been a huge distraction the Democrats were using. Okay. And to your point, Marcus and Carlos, the folks that voted for Trump, and I know this because I follow the economy pretty closely, man. There is a lot of economic pain out there. Okay. The inflationary spike under Joe Biden has been real. Okay. You cannot turn the clock back that easily on all these inflated prices that are out there. The whole tariff thing has added to the uncertainty. Young people are in fact hurting. They're coming out. They're finding that, gee, I studied how to code and now I don't have a job because AI can do it much faster and easier and cheaper than I can, even though I spent 4 years studying computer science. There's a lot of uncertainty, particularly for young people and frustration. The average age of a homeowner in America today, the first-time homebuyer, is 40 years old.
which is
That is
alarming.
crazy, man. That is
Yeah.
crazy that you have to wait until you're 40 years old to buy your first house.
Oh yeah, and affordability is a nut that they've got to crack. So I think with that, just the last few moments here, we have touched on a bunch of topics that are excellent fodder for future episodes. So
Absolutely.
I'm going to go ahead and end off tonight. I want to thank all of you for sticking with us. Thank you to my panel members for your insightful contributions, and we will see you next week.
Take care. Thank you,
Have a
fellas.
good night, everybody.
Got to get a copy of that book.
Yes.